This is the Ultrarunning History Podcast. I'm your host, Davey Crockett. Thanks for coming. This is episode 178. Thousands of hikers and ultrarunners have been making their pilgrimage to the Grand Canyon to hike or run across and some back. However, the summer at the bottom has begun in June. Already there have been 10 helicopter rescues from the inner canyon because of heat-related problems. It is time to wait until October for your next double crossing of this amazing wonder of the world. I have been producing short videos for the new Grand Canyon History YouTube channel. I thought it would be interesting to also publish these as a podcast episode for you to listen to. This is part 2 of those shorts. The video versions of these shorts, of course, have many historic pictures to see. Please subscribe to the very popular Grand Canyon History YouTube channel. Some of these shorts come from my best-selling book, Grand Canyon Rim-to-Rim History. You can get my book on Amazon.
Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon.
Jimmy Owens became a key player in early North Rim development as an experienced guide and a legendary mountain lion hunter. Owens was born in the late 1850s near San Antonio, Texas. In 1905, this Texas cowboy came to the Grand Canyon. Owens and frontiersman Buffalo Jones imported a herd of buffalo from Yellowstone National Park, where Jones had been working as the game warden, and Owens had been the buffalo keeper. Owens experimented crossing buffalo with domestic cattle, producing the Catalo, believing that the breed would be more adapted to cold weather. The experiment failed, but the buffalo remained on the North Rim. Owens was hired by cattlemen to hunt the mountain lions that were killing cattle. They were so numerous that at times he would earn up to $500 a day in bounties. He became known to tourists and settlers in the area as Uncle Jimmy, and had a large pack of hounds that he used to treat the mountain lions for the kill. In 1907, Owens became the game warden for the Kaibab Plateau Preserve, with his main job to hunt and trap mountain lions and wolves on the North Rim to protect the deer, mountain sheep, and cattle. He built a cabin in Harvey Meadows, which was described as a crude log cabin with a large stone fireplace. On the outside were deer antlers, coyote, bobcat, and lion skins, and lion claws nailed everywhere. During his first 3 years, he brought in 125 pelts and several live lions which he roped. It was reported
he was a familiar sight on the North Rim, often seen galloping along on his mule, preceded by a pack of hound dogs. Uncle Jim hunted with his hounds excellently. He had neither horn nor whip. Instead, he threw pebbles with much accuracy of aim at any recalcitrant dog, as several showed a tendency to hunt deer or coyote.
Owens used all sorts of tactics to get his lions. At times he was known to climb a tree with a rope in order to claim a treed lion. He would even crawl into a cave to chase after a cat with a burning torch. On his hunts, he would always carry a rifle and a pistol. In 1913, Owens led Theodore Roosevelt and his sons on a successful mountain lion hunt. Roosevelt wrote of Owens,
"A kinder host and better companion in a wild country could not be found."
As they started their hunt, Owens told the party, "We'll eat off the land, mountain lion meat and wild horse flesh." They had some success, bagging a few mountain lions, but spent much of the time searching for their runaway horses and pack animals and trying to stop the hounds from chasing coyotes. In 1914, Owens trapped what was called a monster mountain lion. It measured 10 feet from tip to tip and had claws 1.5 inches long. Owens hunted mountain lions nearly every day, but that mostly came to an end in 1915 as others in the government took over. He continued to work for the Forest Service until 1919, when he resigned and spent more time guiding hunts. In 1922, he stopped hunting because of significant hearing loss, which made it hard for him to follow his hounds. Over his career, Owens claimed to have killed 532 lions. In 1926, Owens sold his buffalo herd to the state of Arizona for $10,000. In 1929, he left the North Rim. He returned to Texas and later settled in New Mexico, where he died in 1936 and was buried in Las Cruces. A marker was placed on his grave in 2013. He will forever be remembered as the grand old man of the North Rim. Thanks to Albert L. LeCount for his fine book on Jimmy Owens. In 1922, tourists standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, and others on mules going down the Bright Angel Trail, all paused and looked with breathless astonishment as an airplane flew around and then landed down on the plateau near Havasupai Gardens. It was the first time a plane had landed deep in the famed canyon. Royal Thomas, born in 1888, was from Kansas. He received a law degree from Georgetown University and attended Harvard. During World War I, he trained to fly airplanes and after the war became a stunt pilot. On August 8, 1922, with the permission of the park superintendent, Thomas took off from Williams, Arizona, with a passenger, Grand Canyon photographer Ellsworth Kolb, who was armed with a moving picture camera. They flew to the canyon and circled El Tovar Hotel several times, which created a stir. Crowds of people came out waving and shouting. They flew over the canyon, around the battleship, and across the river to Bright Angel Creek. Finally, Thomas went in for a landing on the long brushy plateau north of Havasupai Gardens, which had been prepared and cleared by park employees. He hoped he had enough runway length. From the air, it looked good, but as he approached, he had his doubts and called out to Kolb to undo his seatbelt in case they needed to bail out. The landing went well, and the plane rolled to a stop within 100 feet of the 1,500-foot chasm above the river. The wind direction was not safe enough for takeoff, so they left the plane and started heading up Bright Angel Trail for the night. It was reported.
As they left, a gust of wind caught the aircraft and spun it around, breaking the tail skid and damaging a wing. Thomas did a quick repair with baling wire and an old auto spring.
The next morning, Thomas hiked back down, successfully took off, and flew up to the rim. 10 days later, the Fred Harvey Company hired him to repeat the flight with a news photographer riding along. The resulting film appeared in theaters across the country entitled, The First Flight in the Grand Canyon. 6 years later, on May 3, 1928, Thomas broke Charles Lindbergh's solo flight record, remaining in the air for 35 hours, 35 minutes, circling above Curtis Field, Long Island, New York. A few days later, Thomas crashed into a golf course and died instantly at Moonachie, New Jersey, while flying a speed test in a plane that was going to make a secret flight to Rome, Italy.
While flying at high speed over the town of Moonachie, on the approach to the Teterboro airport, Thomas' aircraft suddenly went into a dive. According to eyewitness reports, one wing had come loose from the plane as its pilot was attempting to make a landing at the airfield.
If you hike down the North Kaibab Trail from the North Rim, in about 4.7 miles, 3,000 feet down, you will hear and see roaring springs pouring out of the cliff face to the north, under Uncle Jim Point. During high runoff, it can be spectacular to watch. This spring has supplied the North Rim with water for nearly 100 years and supplied the South Rim with water for more than 55 years through the Trans-Canyon Water Pipeline. Roaring Springs flows from a deep cave hidden within that cliff. The cave was first discovered in 1928 by workmen employed to build the Grand Canyon Lodge. 3 men explored: Bill Denson of South Dakota, Mac Jackson of Tokerville, Utah, and Paul Swain of Salt Lake City, Utah. Denson first went in with a pocket flashlight but could not go very far. They went back up to the North Rim to get a better source of light. It was reported.
Carrying gasoline lanterns and an adequate supply of fuel, they penetrated a labyrinth of tunnels for a depth of 2 miles from the opening.
Jackson said,
"The cave is filled by the river and got bigger as far as we could see. The inside of the cave is very beautiful. Crystallized limestone formations and thousands upon thousands of stalactites and stalagmites filled the various tunnels or hung from the walls and roof."
The first tunnel ran back about a half mile, and then branched to the left in a smaller tunnel with a junction with 3 more tunnels. There were places where the walls and roof had been caved in. At one point, the creek was 2 feet wide and about 30 feet deep, with ledges on each side. They explored for 4 hours.
Finally, we came to a big room floored entirely by the river and we couldn't go any farther without a boat. As far as we could see, both the cave and the river got bigger and bigger. The river is too deep to wade and too cold to swim, or we would have gone farther.
In 1935, the cave was explored again. 3 park employees, Eddie Siegel, Albert Turner, and Warren Turner, went into the cave and discovered that its depth was about 1 1/4 mile and then was blocked by rock and dirt from an ancient cave-in.
The party made its way back into the cave with the aid of flashlights and gasoline lanterns. The course of the cave follows along in what appears to be an old earthquake fault. Large stalactites and stalagmites, clusters of calcite crystals, and shallow pools of water were found. At one point, the explorers found one side cavern of some considerable length. No very large rooms were discovered, though the cave was easily negotiable throughout the entire length examined. With proper equipment and guidance, park visitors to the Roaring Springs region could easily be afforded an opportunity to experience the thrill of subterranean exploration in this cave.
Instead, the cave entrance was eventually gated and locked. Caving within Grand Canyon National Park is illegal. At some point, a series of 5 rock dams were built inside the Roaring Springs Cave complex to collect water. The cave's average flow of water is 5.8 million gallons per day. In the mid-1960s, the TransCanyon Water Pipeline Plan called for 17% of the spring water to be diverted into 2 intake pipes. At the Roaring Springs pump house, sediment was removed, and chlorine gas was used to purify the water. Some water would be pumped up to the North Rim, and up to 500,000 gallons of water per day would travel by gravity to Indian Garden and then pumped up to the South Rim storage tanks. The rest of the water would free flow out the East Cave entrance down to Roaring Springs Creek. In 2025, a new water system is under construction to take water from Bright Angel Creek near Phantom Ranch to be pumped up to the South Rim. The Roaring Springs water will still be used for the North Rim and Cottonwood Campground. In 1927, construction began on a beautiful spacious lodge and camp on the North Rim of Grand Canyon. In addition, a new trail, the North Kaibab Trail, was being cut into the cliffs down in Roaring Springs Canyon. With these additions, more tourists would come to the North Rim. About the new lodge, it was reported,
This hotel will contain large lounging rooms, recreation hall, storeroom, dining room that will seat 200 persons, kitchen with cold storage plant, shower, baths, and accessories. 62 guest lodges of log construction will be provided.
Both the Grand Canyon Lodge and the North Kaibab Trail were dedicated on September 15, 1928. A large delegation of 200 gathered for the ceremony and took a walk down the new trail. The Grand Canyon Lodge became a special place to escape the summer heat in the days before air conditioning. It was designed by architect Gilbert Stanley Underwood, with a Spanish-style exterior and an observation tower. The employees at the lodge were young men and women from colleges, recommended by their faculty.
The students did all the work, acting as clerks, porters, chambermaids, waiters and waitresses, chauffeurs, and guides. They acted also as entertainers, capable of putting on a musical or literary program of good quality.
It became a wonderful venue for various companies to hold retreats. On September 1, 1932, at about 4 a.m. a kitchen fire broke out in the lodge. As the chief chef was preparing breakfast for the employees, sparks flew and a blaze started. He quickly sounded the alarm. The lodge desk clerk said,
There was hardly enough time for us to get started to put it under control before it was blazing in every room.
20 young women from Provo, Utah, employed as waitresses, fled their dormitory on the second floor.
The guests in the adjoining cabins were aroused and many volunteered in preventing the spread of the flames to the 68 cabins situated around the central lodge. The flames spread so rapidly that it was impossible to save the personal effects of the employees and the rich furnishings in the building. Occupants of 2 burned deluxe cabins lost personal belongings in their haste to reach safety when the flames spread to their quarters.
Within 90 minutes after the fire was discovered, the lodge was a raging inferno. More than 160 people battled the flames, including rangers, employees, bus drivers, visitors, and workers from nearby construction camps. Wet blankets draped over nearby cabins prevented the fire from spreading. The fire left the lodge in a smoldering mass of charred logs and cracked masonry. The loss, including a curio shop, cafeteria, amusement hall, park offices, and a post office, was estimated to be valued at $500,000. The park rebuilt a cafeteria and recreation hall for the cabins, but for nearly 4 years, the lodge ruins stood undisturbed. A redesigned lodge, using the original stonework, was started in 1936. The new lodge opened on June 1, 1937. It was better adapted to the winter snow with steeply pitched roofs. The original second-story observation tower was not rebuilt.
The new lodge offers luxurious accommodations for the wealthy and also improvements to existing tourist cabins and general store. The lounge and dining have extremely large windows which enables one to view the canyon in all its brilliancy and varying moods.
There once was a swimming pool at the bottom of the Grand Canyon at Phantom Ranch. In 1934, a 20-man crew of the Civilian Conservation Corps built a swimming pool by hand at Phantom Ranch. The CCC provided employment for young men during the Great Depression, and the camp at Phantom Ranch was the most remote CCC camp in the country and the most difficult to supply. It was reported,
Company 818 is housed in 6-man pyramidal tents, with a shack for showers, a newly completed mess and recreation hall, and a few odd tents for this and that and the other.
The pool was 72 feet by 40 feet and 19 feet deep. They had to remove hundreds of massive boulders that the creek had deposited during floods over thousands of years. The pool walls and floor were rock and concrete. Years later, a concrete pool deck was added. A tourist watched the construction and said,
"As if the 5,000 feet of the canyon weren't deep enough, they're digging another hole for a swimming pool."
A CCC worker said,
"The first time I saw Phantom Ranch, the swimming pool was just completed. I remember diving into the water and finding little chunks of ice floating there. The temperature down there was about 105, so you can imagine the shock I received."
Diverted water came from Bright Angel Creek. It would be the centerpiece of Phantom Ranch for many decades. Deer would drink out of the pool as they journeyed through the area. A massive flood in 1966 filled the pool with silt. Starting about 1969, it remained empty for several years. It then was discontinued because it was a maintenance chore, had been overused, and without proper chlorine, experienced bacteria growth causing health problems. It was finally filled up in 1972 with many items including hand-carved doors, a piano, oil-burning stoves, grills, the CCC pool table, and items from the old blacksmith shop. The pool changing room was remodeled into a bunkhouse for the ranch staff. On June 30, 1956, 2 airliners collided over the Grand Canyon. All 128 men, women, and children perished when the planes crashed into the canyon about 10 miles upriver from the Desert View Watchtower. Earlier that morning, TWA Flight 2 and United Flight 718 both departed from Los Angeles minutes apart. The TWA Constellation, heading for Kansas City, Missouri, was 31 minutes behind schedule. The United DC-7 was bound for Chicago, Illinois. As the 2 aircraft approached the Grand Canyon, they were nearly at the same altitude in uncontrolled airspace, requiring visual flight rules by the pilots. It is believed some clouds near Grand Canyon Village may have obscured the view between the 2 planes. At about 10:30 a.m., the 2 planes collided. The United DC-7 may have spotted the TWA Constellation in the last seconds and tried to evade it. The United's left wing clipped the top of the TWA's stabilizer, tail fin, and then the fuselage, causing the tail assembly to break away. A depiction video was created. Explosive decompression occurred and the TWA Constellation plunged nose down into the canyon at about 480 miles per hour. It slammed into the north slope of a ravine on the slope of Temple Butte and disintegrated. United 718 lost lift capability, losing any manageable control. Effort was likely made to try to reach the open Colorado River, but it descended in a spiral and slammed into the south side of Chuar Butte and also disintegrated. During that era, there were no radar tracking, homing beacons, or recorders. It was a mystery for quite some time what happened to the planes. Only a garbled transmission was received in Salt Lake City that was later deciphered as, "We are going in," and pull up, from United 718. Finally, after the planes failed to report, search and rescue procedures started at 11:46 a.m. At the canyon, a dense black smoke was spied near Temple Butte, but it was initially thought to be a bush fire caused by lightning. Late in the day, a small plane from Grand Canyon Airlines saw the wreckage for the first time. The following day, many helicopter missions were made to the crash sites to try to recover and identify victims and recover wreckage. Very few remains could be identified. The devastating news was received by relatives of the passengers. 9 days later, on July 9, 1956, a mass funeral for TWA Flight 2 victims was held at Flagstaff, Arizona. Most of their remains were buried in a mass grave at Citizens Cemetery in Flagstaff near the NAU campus. 29 unidentified victim remains of United 718 were interred in 4 coffins at Grand Canyon Pioneer Cemetery, where there also is a memorial monument. In 2014, the crash sites were declared a National Historic Landmark. They are protected and closed to the public. There is still a lot of plane wreckage at each site. Charlie Thornton from Tucson, Arizona, should be recognized as the founder of the idea to hike across the Grand Canyon rim to rim in a day, and he did it beginning in 1956 with blind boys. In 1949, Charlie went to work at the Arizona State School for the Deaf and Blind. When he first came to the school, there was no physical education program available for the blind students, so he organized it. Charlie built a running track for the blind boys. NBC aired a news segment on the unique track. It was reported,
"The track is much like any other, with the exception that the inside perimeter is bordered by the curving length of a tubular steel handrail."
Charlie also created a hiking club at the school. Boys in the club became very fit hiking local trails in the mountains around Tucson and scaled some high mountains. He came up with the idea for some of them to hike rim to rim across the Grand Canyon. In late May 1956, Charlie led 2 completely blind boys and 4 other partially blind boys down South Kaibab Trail, destined for the North Rim. It only took them 2.5 hours to reach the Colorado River, where they crossed the Black Bridge. Charlie said that the boys had an excellent sense of balance, timing, and seldom stumbled. He said,
"Going down the trail, the completely blind keep in touch, usually hand on shoulder, with the man ahead. If the path becomes unusually difficult or hazardous, the leader sings out, and the blind place both hands on the hips of the man ahead.
Climbing up was more difficult, and they used a rope.
Here the leader fastens a rope about his waist extending back on either side. The boys line up between the ropes, then they grasp the ropes with each hand, and skillfully respond to any command or movement of the leader."
The last 5-mile stretch going up to the North Rim was grueling. They finished with an impressive 12-hour crossing. It was reported,
As Raymond Mungaray, age 19, panted to the top, he paused, took a deep breath that burst into a happy grin, clapped his companion on the shoulder, and exclaimed, "Boy, what an experience. We've sure got a lot to tell the fellows when we get back."
Additional rim-to-rim hikes for blind boys were held during the next several years. After returning home, a participant was questioned why in the world would anyone take blind kids to see the Grand Canyon. He replied,
I submit that those blind boys saw more than half the hurrying tourists who promenade along the rimside patio of Bright Angel Lodge. For I know that those boys smelled the fresh fragrance of pine trees in the chilly morning breeze, tasted the hot dust along the downhill trail, and shivered through waist-deep crossings of icy Bright Angel Creek. They achieved something few sighted visitors ever will equal.
On May 13, 1959, an unmanned canoe was fished out of the Colorado River near Phantom Ranch. Along with a large amount of food and gear, it included a log document attached to the canoe by a string that indicated that someone had left Lee's Ferry a week earlier on an unauthorized solo canoe trip down the Colorado River through the canyon. The last entry was made 2 days earlier. Earl Francis, age 27, was the canoeist. He was an artist from San Manuel, Arizona, who had a checkered past, a convicted burglar. A search by air began up and down the river for Francis. Lookouts on the rim were posted to look for a campfire. The next day, Francis was seen floating down the river at the river bend before Black Bridge in a life jacket, with his dog under his arm, also wearing a life jacket. 4 searchers on the shore nearby yelled out. One rushed onto the bridge to let down a rope. Francis, in total control, angled toward the shoreline and he was pulled out by one of the men. He was brought to Phantom Ranch for a nice dinner and was described as being in good shape, despite claiming that he had not eaten for 3 days and spent many hours in the cool water, about 60 degrees. Francis said that he had lost his canoe in Sockdolger Rapids, about 9 miles upriver, as he was pulling it with a rope along from the shore around the rapids. After being dragged for about 50 feet, he let go of the rope. He said,
I decided to save the dog and let the boat go.
He knew he had to continue downriver to reach Phantom Ranch. He said that he inched his way along the cliffs, but spent most of the time in the water, floating with his dog for 2 days. He stopped for the nights. At one point, he attempted to scale the cliffs, but the dog's mournful barking brought him back. Finally, they were rescued. Francis was allowed to stay at Phantom Ranch. He was then brought up by mule and put up at a hotel on the rim for several days until he recovered as he soaked up the attention. His story was covered by newspapers all over the country. It was puzzling that his canoe had arrived on the river only a half day before he did. He then went back down and hauled his 17-foot, 70-pound canoe up the trail and out of the canyon. None of the park employees offered to help him, and he was not allowed to haul it out during the day when the mules were on the trail. Was it all a hoax? It is speculated that he could have brought his canoe and supplies down during the early morning on May 13th, set it afloat, and then hiked upriver, hid, and waited until the next day to make his entrance, floating in the river. However, that would have been a lot to haul down. A few years later, Francis built an unauthorized hermit house on Forest Service land in the Catalina Mountain foothills, above Oracle, Arizona, at a mining claim. After 18 months of wrangling, the government told him he must go. He said that he would never leave the hills, that he was a pioneer prospector in modern times. On August 15, 1966, he sat on a keg of dynamite a few yards from his home and lit the fuse. Death was immediate. He became somewhat of a folk hero and martyr to anti-government activists. Did he really canoe down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon?
With that, this is Davy Crockett, and this is the Ultrarunning History Podcast. I hope you run fast and far, enjoy life, get outdoors, and most of all, stay safe and don't take unnecessary chances.